Right. So, Sarah, you have a really interesting background between CPG and retail. You even had like a stint in HR and merchandising, right? So, give a little introduction about kind of what brought you here today.
Hi, everybody. So I do have a very interesting background across both retail and CPG. So currently at General Mills within brand experience. So brand experience is kind of our crew that puts the consumer at the center, thinks about kind of the big creative campaign idea, and then thinks creative content and all of the different channels through media and how do we reach our consumer. And so I've been fortunate to do a few different stints. I'm always constantly focusing on how do you actually take disparate pieces and parts of a strategy and connect a team to actually deliver those business results. So I have done work within our food service space where I've really worked to connect sales and marketing. I've done work in one of our operating units, really trying to think about how do you connect national and retail media. And right now, I'm in this really long, weird title, means I'm trying to figure out how do we drive our business units, our operating units, and what they're trying to do with all of our marketing capabilities and make that more seamless. So that's kind of the work I've been doing most recently. Prior to that, I was at Target for about 12 years. I was a merchant. I kind of stood up some of our first omni-channel work. I then led some of the transformation work through omni-channel, was in HR, leading that work, and then have kind of brought it all together. And so always very focused from a business perspective, except for when I wasn't actually in HR, and just get a lot of excitement about thinking around like how do you optimize your teams, your processes, et cetera, to drive that. And so nothing I say today will be like revolutionary. You've probably heard all of these things. But good reminders when you are driving so much transformation to kind of keep your eye on some of these things. And we can talk more specifics too at the roundtable later.
Did you just do my job for me?
I just pitched it. I just pitched my own roundtable.
I can just go. Yeah, this is great. No, I mean, I think everyone in here is trying to drive change, right? Like that's why we're marketers. That's why we do what we do. But humans are inherently scared of change. So how do you influence human behavior when people just don't like change in the first place?
Yeah, it's really hard. The interesting thing, though, that is as much as folks maybe are a little bit afraid of change, they also typically are type A, like to win type of people. So nobody wants to be left behind. And we've talked a lot about that today, too. And yesterday, there's not really an option to not change. And so I think what's interesting is we as leaders have a really unique opportunity to kind of engage the team in that future casting and thinking about what the future can be. How do we build it together to really drive that alignment and making it a really interesting unlock to be able to drive kind of that future alignment together.
When you're going through transformation, like what elements typically get lost in the process that we should be looking out for in the future?
Yeah. So any good transformation typically is people, process, technology, right? You're trying to think about how you align all of those things to kind of get to the end line. And the interesting thing that gets lost is actually typically like the human element, right? Like how are you creating the environments to create the right psychological safety, to create the right routines, to make sure that you are not that you are creating the environment to create the right conversations so that change isn't so scary, so that folks feel bought into the future, and so that as you continue to navigate, it feels like a safe space as much as it can.
Yeah, I mean, so much as the transformation is like dependent on the roadmap, right? But you're like, it actually is all about the people around it. Yeah. So are you owning the roadmap individually, or how are you kind of engaging people to like build the overall vision of what you're trying to do?
So of course, within a good transformation, it's typically beyond one team, right? Like you are trying to bring people together. And so I am always a fan of the old-fashioned working session, like literally getting people in a room to do whiteboarding on the strategies that each may individually have and how do you create that shared vision of the future. It is so complicated and messy. We actually just did this last week. I led a session kind of across our CMO's brand experience group, kind of all of the different functions and pieces and parts. And we're divergent thinkers, right? Like it took a lot of time to kind of get us all together, but we're on the journey just to continue to shape for the next fiscal year, like where we're headed. And so it sounds so simple, but literally having all of those people together in the room, feeling like they are shaping it together, cannot be understated.
Yeah. Now, with all of those different cross-functional stakeholders, are you sharing KPIs across everybody, or are you siloing them into your individual cross-functional leaders?
Yeah, we are definitely trying to create alignment as much as possible on the outcomes. And honestly, I think the fact that everyone speaks a slightly different language across the teams can sometimes get complicated. So if you're really grounding in the business results that you're trying to drive and back in then across the different teams on some of those diagnostic or leading indicators, that can be really helpful. There is trepidation, obviously, sometimes that people feel like that's going to box them in, right? Like everyone wants to be the A++ student, so as soon as you put something on a scorecard or you've got a KPI, then there's a lot of pressure. And typically, there is not a single team at Mills, at least there's not a single team that owns a KPI. There's multiple teams that are inputting into that process. So again, from a psychologically safe standpoint, it is not about getting the perfect report card. It is about creating the environments to create the right conversations so that you are constantly evolving and driving the right behaviors versus it feeling like a report card at the end of the day where somebody can get in trouble.
Yeah. So, I mean, if with shared KPIs, like, where's the responsibility? Like, do you use a RACI chart? I hate that word. I'm so sorry. It's so dirty. But do you use one?
We do.
Oh, God.
We do use RACIs in some places.
Not you too.
In some places. However, like when it comes to some of this work to drive the alignment around the KPIs and around the action planning, it is about a clear understanding of what needs to be done and who's involved, but it is not a one person's responsibility.
Yeah. A common theme through any change management or transformation is people are inherently going to think that someone else is trying to take their job, right? Not AI, another team. How do you assuage those fears?
Mm-hmm. That too is very hard. But as you continue to navigate that future, right? If you set the vision or the roadmap of where you want to head, you are actually utilizing these working sessions to build together with the teams. You deeply understand your team members and their skills and their motivations. There is no job description that looks the same 1, 2, 3 years down the line. And so did you hear my Minnesota accent? So if you can involve people in that future casting, again, I think that's the best way. There is no promises, there's no guarantees, but if you take those moments to make sure that your team members feel really convicted in the work, you understand kind of their passion points within it, it becomes a lot easier.
Can you over-process transformation? Like, is there something as like too much process or too many checkpoints or too many meetings, dare I say?
I'm sure there is. I feel like one of our biggest challenges in big corporations is actually like the silos. And so breaking down the silos and just having those forums to come together is incredibly helpful. And it doesn't need to be overly complex. So like a few of the things that, typically I recommend, we've got a pretty well-ingrained monthly business process, right, where you're looking at sales, profit, et cetera. One of the things that I've done with some of my recent teams is similar, but kind of an input into those business meetings to make sure that we are having, again, kind of on the earlier end of some of those diagnostic metrics, having the right conversations, celebrating the teams, actually talking about kind of what comes next together. It is very important to have the right stakeholders in the room within those conversations, but it's not overly engineered. It is not overly complex. It is literally just making sure that we're on the same page of reminder, priorities, reminder, here's what we're doing next, here's how it's going, and then it is that kind of that opportunity to spotlight across the teams. And then finding other fun forums or different ways, right? Just engage with the team, check in, see what's going on. We'll do like an elephants in the room, right? Like people will ping with these big questions that they have on their minds. You can take 5-10 minutes, right? Friday morning, set up a quick meeting, check in, see how everybody's doing. If you know kind of where their head is at, you can kind of address any of those pieces. But just that constant drumbeat cannot be underscored. Again, like during transformation, I think you might feel like you've told everybody what the final destination is over and over again. But without that constant drumbeat, I think people just start to make up their own stories in their minds.
Yeah, well, it's like you have to say it so often that you get tired of hearing about it. That's when you know that they've finally resonated on the vision, right? So you have the long-term vision, you're aligned on there. Like, how often are you checking in on the minor checkpoints along the way? And how do you make it not feel just like a report card?
Yeah. It varies by team. I would say regular enough so that you can react kind of to whatever recent information is coming in. And or again, actually, like what is interesting is I think there is the temptation to stretch it out or maybe do quarterly or less frequently. What is interesting is what I found is those are the moments then when you get all of these side pieces of data or questions or something that you hadn't addressed that suddenly are spitting up. And so I typically recommend some sort of monthly process just to kind of keep everybody aligned. And then your second part of your question was?
The report card. How do you make it not feel like a
report card?
The like, yes, I've done this, check, check, check kind of thing.
Yes. Again, I think that one's a tough one where it is just the psychological safety. No one's going to get a failing grade if you have a metric on the page that is red. Actually, if everything's green, you're probably not getting the right data from folks. Like, you should probably be worried and ask a few more questions. And so if you, as a leader, can show up in those moments and really make it about the collaborative conversation and the future steps versus a finger pointing or like deep analysis of what happened in a way that makes people feel uncomfortable, you'll be in a much better position.
So we have two kind of stakeholders we're managing, right? We have the cross-functional teams who are doing the work, right? Implementing the new change process, or whatever it is. And then you have your leaders, right? Your stakeholders. How do you manage up to your leadership to keep them involved of what the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So one of the things that I typically I recommend is trying to think about each of those different kind of major stakeholder moments where you have the opportunity to align and trying to keep your content or your format as consistent as possible. Again, like you've got different levels of that based on who's in the room, but if you can keep that drum beat and keep that scorecard or whatever you want to call it, communicating up, communicating sideways, communicating down in a specific way. Yeah. It helps the conversation just flow no matter who you're talking to make sure you're keeping folks focused. And now you might not always get all of the things right the first time, right? Like the activities that you have in place or the things that you're measuring can't be stagnant. And so that's where it gets hard to where you might have different conversations that come in with a stakeholder or a partner. But if you know that you've got that regular drumbeat, you know you've got those like specific components on paper, it actually just engages in a new way to have those conversations with the stakeholders, talk about if it's the right new question, new thing, new whatever it may be, but kind of keep eye on the prize and, again, facilitate trade-off as needed.
Well, I mean, keeping focus is critical, right? And oftentimes I found it's not the team that loses focus, it's the leader that loses focus, like the shiny object syndrome, right? Mm-hmm. How do you say no to them if they come in at the 11th hour with like a oddball idea or a change of something that we just have to do? Like, how do you say no?
Yep. If you have your outcomes and your objectives on a piece of paper very clearly that has been part of this drumbeat, it is actually an amazing opportunity to open up the conversation in a way that actually feels very open to conversation, to say, will that drive this outcome more than this thing that we have on the page that we've been working towards? Yeah. Sometimes maybe yes, and it does require a little bit of discovery, but typically they will talk themselves out of whatever shiny object might be coming their way because of how much vetting and how much alignment has already been done across the organization with what is ever on your page.
Yeah. Are there scenarios where you would ever bring retailers along with this like transformation journey that you'd be working through?
Yes. So retailers, partners, agencies, et cetera, I think we are a super collaborative environment at General Mills. We typically try to lean into that, especially with our shopper marketing or customer marketing teams. We are often talking about the future together, building tests together, et cetera. Like, we get really excited about the opportunity to kind of be first in the space or try something new. And that requires us kind of having that aligned objective of what we're trying to do, what they're trying to do. And I think easier said than done. Sometimes that takes some time. But ideally, yes, we try to do that as much as possible.
How much of the transformation or change management that you've been a part of has been driven by an outside consulting partner versus driven internally?
Good question. I would say there's a little bit of both. So we're really fortunate. We've got really smart people internally. We're very fortunate. We've got really smart partners kind of across the industry. The fact of the matter is, I think they can, when you have a consultant or somebody externally, they can help with the strategy potentially, or like crowdsourcing across a lot of different smart companies, what a future might be. But we are really owning both at Mills and Target, when we've done our big transformations, it's the internal teams that are really driving and bringing that forward, because only we understand the team and the processes and how to get that move forward.
I'm sure no one's been in a situation where an outside consulting company has told you how to do your jobs, right? Nobody. That's a totally new thing. So what things have you implemented personally that help you not get distracted when you're trying to manage everybody else to also stay on focus?
I am like such a dork on my calendar. I literally will have a reoccurring meeting every Friday with my priorities or with my objectives, and making sure that I'm constantly having that reminder to myself, so that when there are new things coming in or coming at me, I stay super, super focused. I think whether it be quick stand-ups with my team, whether it be just, again, some of these informal touch bases, it's a way just to like say it out loud. Sometimes I feel like everyone will have something coming at them. I might have something coming at me too. And rather than it piling up in your inbox or being this thing in the back of your brain and you causing spin and causing disruption, just those quick check-ins kind of across the teams, just to kind of see how people are doing, is really important.
A lot of the conversation has been so internally focused, right? People, process, resources. Mm-hmm. Where does the end consumer fit in all of your transformation work?
Great question. So ideally at the center of our strategy, right? Like everything that we are doing is in service of the consumer. The funny part is about that is we often get in our own way. Like is the great intent that we all have to better serve our consumer is lost because of how siloed we can often be. And so if we keep that consumer at the center, they're at the center of the strategy, honestly, it's a huge competitive advantage when you can move faster, respond to them better, and keep teams aligned to just do better for them at the end.
Yeah. Before we open it up to audience questions, number one takeaway that you would want this group to walk away from?
So transformation is hard. Again, like not rocket science, probably something, no new ideas that you've never heard before. But again, a reminder that really clear roadmap that you can use across stakeholders, stakeholder alignment, really clear outcomes, KPIs, or like the work to be done within that. The team engagement with the future casting is really important. And then just that constant drumbeat to make sure that everyone stays aligned.
You know, Sarah, I said one takeaway. I think that was 4.
That was 4. I'm sorry.
Questions?
Oh,
do you just want a mic?
One.
Do you need a mic just for yourself?
Be sure to let us know who you are.
Yeah. Brian Chaptek, Recipes. Is the focus aim small, miss small? I know when I was at L'Oreal, I did some of this stuff, and it wasn't about trying to shoot for the moon, but trying to find a brand or a group to test into to prove the model. And then the follow-up to that is, what happens when you run into a scenario where you're with senior leadership and you haven't hit, or you're not going to hit your goals, but you know that you will, but they don't want to give you more time?
Yep. Great question. I would say just because we are a company of such big iconic brands, typically we do test into a lot of the things that we do just to prove out whatever we believe. That's not always true. Sometimes we do larger transformations, but typically, yes, that's often how we will at least get the nugget of an idea to try something bigger. And then your second question was about not getting to goal. Yes, but you don't get additional time. So I think that's a great one again too, where you can either have time. What is it? It's time, quality, speed.
Yep.
Yes. And so having that very specific conversation, right? Like what are the trade-offs behind it? And or like often there's a budget cut or there's different pieces and parts. If you're really clear again on the outcomes or those KPIs and what will be sacrificed, you have to be realistic, right? Otherwise everyone's going to be disappointed in the end anyway. Mm-hmm.
Oh, one more.
Hey, Sarah, Dagny with Fetch. You talked a lot about like managing up and how to communicate your KPIs up to the C-suite. How would you describe in your very kind of niche role what your KPIs are and how you're achieving them with your C-suite?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's sales, profit, et cetera. Like that's the end outcome. We have been really focused on then like inputs into those. So household penetration, for example, is a key metric that we are continuing to track and talk about. We then get kind of into a layer deeper within that as we talk about what does that mean for media, what does that mean for the different components. But it's nothing revolutionary. It's literally just trying to take those business metrics, align it then to some of the marketing metrics that we have, and then build it back from there. So like, for example, a year ago, our media team kind of was the singular owner of any of the data. We didn't socialize it. We didn't talk about it. Same thing on the brand side. Marketing mix came, kind of felt like a report card. Didn't know if you wanted to share it. And so half of it is actually just the socialization to make sure we're all having the right conversation. And again, it doesn't feel threatening. It is not meant to be a report card. But if the broader team isn't understanding what's happening, we're never going to action plan together. And so it's slow processes just to kind of unlock that and drive the right conversation.
All right, guys, that was awesome. Thank you so much, Erin and Sarah.